Seemingly insignificant parental behaviors can have a profound impact on a child's psychological development, often in ways that don't become apparent until much, much later in life. These subtle actions or inactions can shape a child's sense of self, emotional regulation, and ability to form healthy or even unhealthy relationships. Small, repeated behaviors like a parent's consistently dismissing a child's emotions, like stop crying, it's not a big deal, can teach the child that their feelings don't matter. Over time, this might erode their self-worth or make them suppress emotions, leading to problems we know today like anxiety, depression, or difficulty expressing themselves as adults. It's not about a single dramatic event, but the cumulative effect of these micro interactions. Then there's the other side, overprotection. A parent who hovers, constantly fixing a child's problems or shielding them from failure might seem loving, but this can stunt the child's ability to develop resilience or independence. Down the line, that kid might grow into an adult who panics at the first sign of adversity or feels incapable of handling the challenges of life. Picture a parent who never lets their kid climb a tree because they might fall, or who swoops in to finish their homework when they struggle. On the surface, this might seem like care, but what's really happening? The child isn't learning to navigate failure or assess risk. They're being taught the world is too dangerous to handle alone, and that they're not capable of figuring out themselves. Over time, this can erode their confidence too, leaving them with a nagging sense of incompetence. Then there's the emotional angle. Overprotective parents might smother a child's independence by constantly monitoring their feelings or their decisions, saying stuff like, "Don't be sad, I'll fix it," or "You don't need to talk to that friend, they upset you." This can short-circuit the child's capacity to process emotions or solve interpersonal conflicts. Fast forward and you've got an adult who freezes at the first sign of distress or leans too hard on others to regulate their emotions. It can also breed this dependency. A parent always steps in, tying shoelaces at age 10, calling teachers to argue fucking grades, I don't know. A child doesn't build this sense of agency. They might become an adult who can't make decisions without external validation, perpetually second-guessing themselves. This is where you begin to see links to anxiety disorders or even a learned helplessness, a concept from behavioral psychology where someone feels powerless because they've never had to fend for themselves. The paradox is brutal. The parent wants to protect, but they end up creating vulnerability. The kid might not face trauma in the classic sense, no yelling, no neglect, but the slow, quiet suffocation of their autonomy can leave them psychologically brittle. They may not even connect the dots back to mom or dad hovering too close. It just feels like they're bad at life. Because the child's brain, still forming its neural pathways, doesn't care about intent. It's soaking up every signal, building a layout for how the world works. By adolescence or adulthood, these subtle wounds can surface as deep trauma, often leaving the person wondering why they feel so broken over nothing. Even something seemingly insignificant like tone and body language play a big role, I think. A parent who sighs heavily or rolls their eyes when a child asks for help might not think twice about it. But to the kid, it could signal they're a burden, planting seeds for guilt or people-pleasing tendencies that fester deeper into adulthood. They're not just hearing words, they're decoding the emotional subtext, often with more weight than the words themselves. Imagine a kid asking for help with something, say, tying their shoes or figuring out a puzzle. The parent may be tired from a long day, lets out a heavy sigh or rolls their eyes before responding. To the adult, it's just a fleeting expression of exhaustion, forgotten in seconds, but to the child, it's a billboard screaming, "You're annoying me," or "You should have gotten this by now." Kids don't have the context or emotional maturity to rationalize it as "Mom's just stressed." Instead, their brains, wired to seek approval and safety from caregivers, interpret it as rejection or judgment. That moment sticks. So, what's the fallout? That sigh or that eye roll can plant a seed saying, "I'm a burden." If it happens enough, say over months or years, the child starts to internalize it. They might stop asking for help, not because they don't need it, but because they're scared of being too much. This can sprout into guilt, feeling inherently wrong for having needs, or people-pleasing, where they bend over backward to avoid triggering that rejection again. By adulthood, it's not just a quirk, it's a lens they see the world through. I have to earn love by being perfect or invisible. It's crazy to me how deep this cuts because it's so quiet, happening in the background. A scream or a slap leaves a clear mark, but a sigh slips under the radar. The parent doesn't log it as trauma, and the kid doesn't have the words to call it out yet. But the brain's still tallying it, building neural pathways around "I'm not enough." And by the time they're fucking 30 wrestling with approval seeking or self-doubt, they might not even trace it back to those moments. That's the power of the unspoken. It's subtle, pervasive, and sticks like glue. Consistency matters too. A parent who is unpredictably affectionate, one day warm, the next day distant, can create a sense of confusion or insecurity. This could also wire the child to crave approval or fear abandonment patterns that repeat in their adult relationships. More on that later. Look at how borderline personality traits often trace back to erratic caregiving. It's not about abuse, but instability. And let's dive deeper into this idea of consistency, or the lack of it, and how a parent's unpredictable affection can can rewire a child's emotional world. It's not about overt harm like abuse, it's instability, the emotional whiplash, so to speak, that does the damage. A parent who's warm and loving one day and then cold and distant the next creates a roller coaster that a kid can't navigate, and that chaos leaves scars. Picture this: a child gets a hug and a praise for a drawing on Monday. You're so creative, and their little brain lights up with dopamine, feeling safe and valued. Then Tuesday rolls around. Same kid, same drawing, but the parent's stressed, distracted, or just not in the mood. They brush it off. Not now, I'm busy. Or worse, don't even respond at all. To the adult, it's just a mood swing, no big deal. But to the child, it's a puzzle with no solution. Why was I enough yesterday and not today? Their developing mind, still figuring out cause and effect, can't parse the inconsistency. Instead, they start to assume they're the variable. Something about them must be wrong. This unpredictability messes with a kid's need for a stable emotional anchor. Attachment theory calls this caregiver's availability, not just a physical presence, but emotional reliability. When it's erratic, the child's attachment system goes haywire. They might cling harder, seeking reassurance, or pull back, assuming no one's trustworthy. Either way, their brain's wiring up for insecurity. Neurobiologically, this tracks. Inconsistent care spikes cortisol levels, the stress hormone, keeping their amygdala, the fear center, on high alert. Over time, that hypervigilance becomes the baseline, priming them to scan for rejection or abandonment all the time. Now let's connect this to craving approval or fearing abandonment. If love feels like a moving target, the child learns to chase it. They might become hyper-attuned to others' moods, constantly adjusting themselves to earn that warmth again. Think of a kid who starts overachieving or over-apologizing just to lock down a parent's affection. Fast forward to adulthood and that pattern sticks. They're the partner who panics at a delayed text, assuming it's the end, or the friend who bends over backwards to avoid conflict. Their nervous system's stuck on prove your worth, because that's what survival looked like back then. The tragedy is just how automatic this becomes. They don't see it as a pattern from way back when, they just think, this is who I am. That's the legacy of love, as a moving target, a life spent running towards something they're not sure they'll ever catch, all because worthy was never given. It was all a chase. The reality is, intent doesn't erase impact. Parents might not mean harm, they're often just tired, stressed, or repeating what they know. That sigh when the kid asks for the fifth story at bedtime. It's not, I hate you, it's, I'm exhausted. That distracted nod when they ramble about school. Not rejection, just a brain fried from multitasking. They might even think they're doing great, keeping the lights on, food on the table, no yelling. But the intent's a one-way street. The child's brain isn't on it. It's not sitting there reasoning, oh, Dad's just stressed, he still loves me. It's a sponge, not a judge, absorbing the raw data of the tone, the touch, and attention, then hardwiring it into a worldview. And that's where the neural pathways come in. A child's brain is sort of like a construction zone, synapses forming, pruning, strengthening based on experience. A parent's inconsistency, warm one day, distant the next, doesn't register as circumstance. It's coded as the world is unreliable. Neuroplasticity is at its peak here. So repeated signals, even subtle ones, carve deep grooves. If a sigh or an eye roll tags along with "you're too much," the brain might etch that in. My needs are wrong. No memo about mom's bad day makes it to the prefrontal cortex. It's still offline, leaving the emotional brain to run the show. But by adolescence, these frameworks start showing their cracks. Maybe they're the teen who clings to toxic friends, desperate for validation they never locked down at home, or they're shutting down, armored against a world they've learned might turn cold without as much as a warning. Adulthood's where it really unravels. Those subtle wounds fester into something heavier. They might feel crushing anxiety over a coworker's offhand comment, or spiral into self-loathing when a partner needs space, wondering, why am I like this? The trauma's deep because it's foundational, built into the brain's architecture, not tacked on by one big event. And I think the nothing part is a big giveaway. They'll say, my parents didn't hit me, didn't starve me. Why do I feel so broken? It's because the brain doesn't need a blockbuster tragedy to mark something as trauma. Developmental trauma's sneakier than that. It's cumulative. Baked into everyday moments. The impact's real. Higher risks for depression, relational instability, even physical health issues like chronic stress-related inflammation. I suffer from this myself. And yet, because it's not an obvious horror story, these people, they end up blaming themselves, thinking I'm overreacting instead of seeing it as a wound with a cause. Ultimately, intent doesn't erase impact because the brain's not a courtroom, it's a recorder. Parents might love fiercely, but if the signal's garbled, tired sighs, distracted glances, unpredictable warmth, the child's still left with a precarious foundation. By the time they've grown, they're wrestling with ghosts they can't name, built from moments no one thought mattered. All of this, the subtle wounds, the neural pathways, the philosophical weight of how we're shaped by our parents' imperfect signals, influences our partner choice later in life. It's not just about who we pick, it's about why and how those early patterns steer us towards relationships that either repeat the past or desperately try to rewrite it. First off, we're drawn toward the familiar, even when it's broken. Psychologists call this the repetition compulsion, an idea that we subconsciously seek out dynamics that mirror our childhood, not because they're good, but because they're known. If a parent's affection was unpredictable, you might gravitate towards a partner who's hot and cold, chasing that old moving target of love. That roller coaster feels like home even if it's hell. And the kid who overachieved to win approval might pick someone hard to please, forever proving their worth. The one who felt like a burden, they might latch onto a partner who needs constant rescuing, reinforcing that I'm only valuable when I'm useful script. Then there's the other side of the same coin, overcorrection. If a parent's overprotection stunted your autonomy, you might seek a partner who's fiercely independent or even detached, hoping to claim the freedom you never had. If emotional invalidation left you starving for attunement, you might chase someone smothering, mistaking intensity for care. This isn't just preference, it's a subconscious bid to heal old wounds. Attachment theory, I think, backs this. An anxious child might pair with an avoidant partner, replaying that push-pull sort of dance, while an avoidant child might pick someone clinging, testing their walls. The nervous system's in on it too. These early stress patterns don't just fade, they make you hypersensitive to rejection or abandonment. So you might choose partners who trigger that alarm, keeping you on edge but still alive. You might go for safe, someone steady to a fault, only to feel suffocated because calm feels foreign. It's about seeking completion, that vulnerability from childhood, that thrownness into a world we didn't design leaves us incomplete, groping for meaning through others. A partner becomes a mirror, reflecting back either the self we know or the one we wish we'd become. But here's the thing, we don't always see it. We don't always see that reflection. We think we're choosing freely, but we're half puppets to those old patterns, acting out scripts we didn't write. We're free to choose, but the options feel preloaded, so to speak. Of course, the stakes are high. A partner isn't just a person, they're a stage for replaying or repairing the past. The over-apologizer might stay with someone cold, hoping this time they'll earn it. The approval seeker might pick a critic, forever auditioning. Or they might flip the script, choosing kindness to unlearn the hurt, but even then they might sabotage it, distrusting what feels too good. So what does this say? I think it says partner choice is less about the present than the past influence. It's a haunting predicament that's half instinct, half ghost, where we're pulled to people who fit the shape of our wounds, either to reopen them or to stitch them shut. We're not just choosing a lover, we're choosing a reckoning with who we've been made to be. Recently, I've been thinking about the question, why do we stay in relationships that only serve to hurt us? And as complex as this issue may be, I think it can be reducible to the fact that we tend to cling to familiar pain instead of facing unknown pain. Familiar pain is comfortable because it's predictable. We know what to expect and how to cope with it. And on the other hand, the unknown pain brings uncertainty, and uncertainty can be scary. We can't be certain of the outcome when we face the unknown, but with familiar pain comes the illusion of certainty. The comfort of the familiar is like a worn-in pair of shoes. Maybe they pinch a little, maybe the soles are thin, but you know exactly how they fit. In relationships that hurt us, the familiarity isn't just a passive preference, it's a psychological foundation. We gravitate towards it because it's a known quantity, a landscape we've already charted, even if it's littered with emotional landmines. There's a strange solace in that predictability, and it's worth unpacking why it feels so safe even when it's anything but. For one, familiar pain comes with a script. You've been through the cycle before, the argument, the silence, the apology, or whatever pattern defines the mess. You know the cues, the triggers, the way it escalates and eventually settles. That repetition breeds a kind of mastery. You've learned how to brace yourself, how to cope, how to patch yourself up afterward. It's not that it doesn't hurt, it's that you've built a toolkit for it. You've got your go-to distractions, your rationalizations, your little rituals to get through the consequences. In a weird way that makes it feel manageable, like you're in control of the chaos. Compare that to the unknown, where there's no playbook, no rehearsal. Walking away from the relationship might mean facing new kinds of pain, loneliness, regret, the what ifs. And without that script, it's like stepping into a void. The familiar, flaws and all, feels more like solid ground by comparison. There's also something about identity tied up in it. When you've been in a relationship for a while, even a toxic one, it becomes part of who you are. The pain, the dynamic, the role you play, it's embedded into your story. You might be the one who endures, the one who fixes, the one who loves despite it all. That's familiar terrain, and it's comforting because it's yours. Stripping that away means redefining yourself, and that's daunting. The familiar pain might suck, yeah, but it's your pain, shaped by your history and your habits. And let's not overlook the biological angle here. Our brains are wired for familiarity. Routine, even a painful routine, lights up some neural pathways over and over. It's efficient, it's low effort. Breaking away demands rewiring, forging new paths, and that takes energy and risks. Staying put, even in discomfort, is the path of least resistance. It's why we'll sit through the same old fight instead of facing the silence of an empty house. And I'll add that sometimes it's not just about fear of uncertainty, but also about hope, or maybe even denial. We stick around because we convince ourselves that the relationship might change, that the good times could outweigh the bad if we just wait it out. It's like we're gambling with emotional currency, betting on potential rather than cashing out on reality. And then there's the sunk cost fallacy. I've already invested so much. Walking away now feels like admitting defeat. It's not just like a passive clinging to familiarity, it's an active investment in a narrative we've constructed. one where we're both the hero and the gambler, chasing a payoff that might never come. Take hope or denial, depending on how you frame it. It's this persistent voice telling us that things could get better. Maybe we've seen flashes of what the relationship could be, those fleeting moments of connection or kindness that light up the dark patches within us. We latch onto those things like it's our lifeline, telling ourselves they're proof of this imagined, untapped potential. It's almost like we're the architects of an imaginary future, building on ground that is shaky and unpredictable. We think, if I just try harder, if I'm patient enough, if I give one more chance, then maybe the scales will tip and the good will finally outweigh the bad. It's a seductive story because it casts us up as these resilient, loyal people, as someone who doesn't give up. But the flip side of that is denial, refusing to see that those glimpses might be exceptions more than they are promises. We're not just betting on potential, we're doubling down on a mirage, ignoring the reality that's staring us down. Then there's the gambling metaphor. Emotional currency is such a perfect way to think about it. Every argument we endure, every tear we shed, every compromise we make, it's like sliding another chip across the table. We're in too deep to walk away empty-handed, so we keep playing, hoping for the jackpot. The stakes feel higher the longer we stay, and the idea of cashing out feels less like freedom and more like failure. It's not just about losing the relationship, it's about losing the version of ourselves we've attached to it, the one who believed it was worth it, who thought they could fix it. Walking away means folding the hand, and that can sting worse than staying in the game, even when the odds are stacked against us. And the sunk cost fallacy ties it all together. Time, energy, love, it's all capital we've poured in, and the more we invest, the harder it is to let go. I've spent years here, we tell ourselves. I've built a life around this. If I leave now, what was it all for? It's not just about the relationship anymore. It's about protecting the story of our own effort. Admitting defeat feels like erasing a chapter of our lives, like all of that struggle was wasted. So we stay, not because it's good, but because leaving means reckoning with the possibility that we misjudged the investment from the start. It's a brutal catch-22 situation. The deeper we're in, the more we feel we have to justify staying, even when the returns just aren't there. Emerging from that familiar pain and healing from it is no small feat. It's like prying yourself out of a trench you've dug with your own hands. But it's doable, and it starts with flipping the script on what feels comfortable. First, you've got to name the beast. Recognize that the familiarity is what's holding you, not some cosmic rule that you're stuck forever. Call it out. This hurts. I know it hurts, but I stay because it's what I know. That awareness is your foothold. It's not about blaming yourself, it's about seeing the pattern for what it is. Once you've got that clarity, you can start interrupting it. Small steps work here. Test the waters of the unknown in low-stakes ways. Skip the usual argument and take a walk instead. Say no when you normally say yes. It's like flexing a muscle you haven't used in a while. You're proving to yourself that change doesn't have to mean collapse. Breaking free means facing the void, though, and that's where it gets really painful. The unknown will feel shaky. Loneliness might hit, or doubt, or even grief for the relationship you're leaving behind. Lean into that discomfort instead of dodging it. Like I mentioned in a previous video, healing isn't about avoiding pain. It's about trading the old cyclical hurt for a new kind that has an endpoint. Build a scaffold for yourself. Friends, family, a journal, a pet, whatever keeps you steady while you figure out who you are without that familiar weight. You don't have to have it all solved in day one. You just need enough to stand on while the ground settles. Then there's the hope trap. The one where you bet on maybe it'll get better. My advice, starve it out. Look at the evidence, not the fantasy. Write down what the relationship actually delivers, not what you wish it would. If the bad outweighs the good consistently, then that's your reality check. It's not giving up, it's choosing not to gamble your peace on a fucking long shot. And the sunk cost? Reframe it. Those years, they weren't wasted. They taught you what you don't want, what you're worth, what you can survive. That's not loss, that's a tuition for a better life. Needless to say, healing is a long game. The familiar left scars, trust issues, self-doubt, maybe even a warped sense of what is normal. Unpack that slowly. Ask yourself what you learned to tolerate that you shouldn't have, and start setting boundaries like you're guarding a fortress. Celebrate the wins too every time you choose yourself over the old pain. That's a brick in a new foundation. It's not linear, of course. I mean, you'll backslide, you'll end up missing the comfort, questioning the move. But that's fine. Keep moving anyway. The trick is patience with yourself, mostly. You're not just leaving a relationship, you're rewiring what feels safe. Give it time, and the unknown starts to feel less like a death sentence and more like a possibility.